Good day and thank you for joining Civilnet. Today our guest joining us through Skype is Uladzislau Belavusau. He's an assistant professor of European law at the Department of European Studies at the University of Amsterdam. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Rubina.
I wanted to ask you, what was your reaction and estimation of the recent Bundestag resolution regarding the Armenian genocide?
Well, it was overall positive. First of all, in the light of the recent decisions from several courts in Europe with ambiguous position on the genocide denialism as the phenomenon we are largely observing these days in Europe before courts. First, the 2008 decision of the Conseil Constitutionnel, which struck the law which was criminalizing the denial of Armenian genocide on the account of violation of freedom of speech, and very similar or somewhat similar to this decision in Perinchek in the Grand Chamber 2015 of the European Court of Human Rights. Again, we see a case of the denialist coming from Turkey, making a speech somewhere in Switzerland, denying the genocidal atrocities towards the or the genocidal character, at least of atrocities to the Armenian population in the Ottoman Turkey in the beginning of the 20th century. And again, the European Court of Human Rights saying that this matter should be left to freedom of expression. Criminalization goes too far. Well, obviously, it's one thing to say that it's one thing to recognize the genocide. Actually, a lot of countries, also those very remote from Armenia, let's say Paraguay or Brazil, and all the big countries from Russia to France and Canada, all recognized the genocidal character of the atrocities towards Armenians. It is a completely different thing to criminalize the denial of those atrocities, and that's when it's into a huge problem with censorship. Why I'm so positive about this decision coming from Germany is, on the first account, is of course the timing, because it comes after a year after the celebration of the not celebration, but of the commemoration, of course, of the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide in Ottoman Turkey. It also follows up those controversial decisions from several courts in Europe. And most importantly, Germany is the country with a very prominent Turkish population. We're talking about 3 million of Turkish residents in Germany, so it's a huge political force. About 2 million of whom are holding German passports. It is even more remarkable that the proponent of the law has the Turkish origin himself, being the member of the Green Party in Germany. And Germany is also a very important player in the memory politics in Europe. It was the first country to criminalize Holocaust, first through the so-called Volksverhetzung, incitement to hatred, which was inserted into the penal code, Strafgesetz in Germany. And then we observed the spillover effect pretty much every country on the continent, Austria, France, Central Eastern European countries, implemented a very similar clause in their criminal codes. Also, Germany played a central role in the criminalization of the genocide denialism on the level of the European Union with the Council decision of 2008. It was the German presidents which basically pushed the instrument to the European arena. Therefore, it is ever more important that this resolution came these days from Germany.
Well, Turkey's reaction to especially the German recognition of the Armenian genocide is very severe, very aggressive, and there are talks now that there will be Turkey's trying to open a court case against the Bundestag. Do you think this is something feasible, or do you think this is something that will yield any results?
This is just a political populism. I don't see any potential for that case matter ever rising in the German context. I also don't see procedurally how they're going to bring it and on what account exactly. For example, if it was the matter of prosecuting some Armenian genocide denialists in Germany, that would rise at least a fact to a matter before the court on the allegation of the violation of freedom of speech, whereas pure recognition is kind of a symbolic memory law with very soft power. We have the same recognition already available on the European level, on the level of the both major European organizations. We have the similar resolution on the level of the Council of Europe. And we have a very similar resolution recognizing Armenian genocide also by the European Parliament on the EU level. And that's not to mention the fact that lots of countries beyond Germany, neighbors of Germany, Austria, France, have recognized Armenian genocide earlier.
So, in this case, do you think the German recognition will have a general effect on court case regarding Armenian genocide denialism, like the Perinchek case? Do you think this generally the attitude of the law will change towards denialism?
Definitely no. Here we need to understand that there is a huge distinction between soft law, which establishes a commemoration practice, which says, for example, that we establish a certain day in April, as many of those laws available on the regional or national levels in Europe and Latin America recognize Armenian genocide. And it is a completely different matter when the law, through a criminal punishment, establishes the provision on denialism, basically prohibiting denialism of a certain genocide or genocides in general.
You've spoken a lot about parallels drawn between the Holocaust and the Armenian genocide. Could you just share your views with us on the matter?
Well, the reason why I was, in my publication, addressing a lot this distinction between Holocaust denial and Armenian genocide is precisely due to the Perinchek case in Strasbourg. Perinchek saga, I'm calling it saga because there were in fact two cases. First, the early decision in 2000. We have the Grand Chamber, Big Chamber decision on the 15th of October 2015. And in both cases, we observe a very negligent, a very kind of unexpected approach, establishing a hierarchy between mass atrocities in the history of the Western civilization of the 20th century. On the one hand, the court kind of is willing to recognize freedom of speech as the priority in terms of leaving the historical discourse free from judicial intervention, which is, of course, fully understandable. What is less understandable is the attempt of the court to justify the difference between the Shoah, the mass annihilation of 6 million of Jews in the Nazi period, and the atrocities committed to 1.5 million of Armenians at the beginning of the 20th century in the Ottoman Turkey. The court kind of establishes a fiction that on the one hand, Holocaust is a recognized genocide and Armenian genocide is not, which is very contestable because in the earlier judgment of 2013, the court refers to Nuremberg trial. And Nuremberg trial was about anything but not about the Holocaust and establishing the de facto Shoah. So it's a later phenomenon. Second, the court stipulates that we cannot recognize explicitly Armenian genocide as genocide in any event. It would be a matter for a, let's say, a military tribunal somewhere in The Hague and not for the Court of the Human Rights itself. Why? Because we cannot apply international criminal law retrospectively. As we all know, the genocide as the crime was established by the 1948 Convention on the Prevention of the Crime of Genocide. And obviously both the Shoah, the Holocaust, and the Armenian genocide happened before. But then this distinction is also kind of a subject to criticism because if the court says that we still can apply the genocidal terminology, the G term, the court is so much afraid to pronounce clearly in Perinchek to the Holocaust, and they cannot apply it to the Armenian genocide. And I also suspect that they won't apply it, let's say, the case arises in the context of Holodomor, the politics of the mass starvation orchestrated by the Bolsheviks in Ukraine. An interesting fact is that Lemkin, a Polish-Belarusian Jew who actually coined the terminology of genocide, combining one Greek and one Latin roots, he himself addressed both Armenian genocide and Holodomor as the examples of genocides. So that kind of leads to the conclusion that the court creates a hierarchy of genocides where the Holocaust acquired the status of the mega atrocity and everything else is just paling by comparison, and let's say 1.5 million of Armenian victims say just, let's say, a 0.5 of this mega atrocity, and it is ultimately unclear. And legal certainty is the extremely important constitutional principle. It is extremely unclear whether anything else apart from the Holocaust itself will ever qualify to the definition, to the terminology of genocide, the G term applied by Strasbourg.
To this end, is there anything the Armenian lobby or the Armenian government or organizations can do to address the issue on the European legislative level?
Well, I think that the Armenian diasporas were already extremely active in lobbying, in the first place, various resolutions by parliaments, both national, let's say somewhere in Brazil or Canada, and also on the local level, let's say some province, let's say Tuscany in Italy has recognized the Armenian genocide. And I think that that was due to the extremely successful lobbying of the Armenian diasporas throughout the world. What the Armenian diasporas were also trying to lobby in various think tanks and organizations is, of course, the penalization of the denial of Armenian genocide, which was less successful because many countries would be immediately very skeptical about the possibility of censorship of historical discourse being even such a grave matter as the denial of a genocide.
But yet we see that that's not the case with Holocaust. Countries are more willing to criminalize Holocaust denial.
Well, the reason is the kind of a legal fashion established in Europe after the Second World War. In the absence of the European demos and the necessity to build the European citizenship, the Jews, this universal European, have become the semantic block for kind of shaping the European identity. And the apology and the trauma of the Shoah, which kind of was equally spread on the European countries, was one of the important mechanisms, on the one hand, to overcome the bad memories and the traumatization of the Second World War. On the other hand, to shape a completely new identity of Europeans. Also, Germany was extremely important in kind of giving an example of the denial. First, they do it through the provision on the incitement to hatred, and later on, after Israel in 1986, Knesset is adopting a law on the denial of the genocide. So it's actually coming very late, only in the 80s. Germany, then France, Austria, and we observe the spillover effect throughout the world. Lots of countries adopt a specific provision on the criminalizing denial of the Holocaust.
And one last question, with Turkey's clear alliance with Azerbaijan, and I'm referring to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and the peace process or the negotiation process that's going on, what's your take of the process that will follow the April events?
Well, the problematic, I'm not sure if I'm actually a specialist to comment on Nagorno-Karabakh conflict itself, but what I find striking in, let's say, the Perinchek decision, especially in the recent Grand Chamber decision, is the specific paragraph, a very extensive paragraph, where the court distinguishes the Holocaust on the one hand and Armenian genocide on the other hand, suggesting that behind Holocaust we always can identify the anti-Semitism as the prevalent ideology. And behind Armenian genocide denial, and in particular with regard to Dogo Perinchek, this Turkish politician from and a very poorly known Labour Party traveling to Switzerland, we cannot really establish the phenomenon of anti-Armenianism, which is extremely scandalous because the court itself fails to notice a huge demonstration of people with Turkish and Azeri flags, and in comparison to a very small representation of people with Armenian flags around the European Court of Human Rights, basically converting the European Court of Human Rights Strasbourg into podium, into this theatrical podium for kind of justifying or whitewashing the Turkish crimes, the Turkish perpetrations towards the Armenians. And again, we observe a very clear ideological stance of two countries, Turkey and always relying Azerbaijan, on the one hand, in severely denying Armenian genocide as the historical fact, reclassifying it to just mass atrocities in the context of the imperial conflicts. But this is very comparable to what, for example, Iran does to Jews with the annual conferences on the so-called Holocaust, for example, right? It's again trivialization and denialism. And second, also for prosecuting people, actually, for denying the mass atrocities or the genocidal character of those atrocities to Armenia. Let's not forget that in Turkey we still have the provision in the Criminal Code, Article 301, a very scandalous provision criminalizing the defamation of Turkishness, which goes beyond all the standards of freedom of expression. And let's not forget about the case of Grandink, a prominent Turkish journalist of the Armenian origin, who was assassinated for his views, and there was also the proceedings on the application of the provision on the defamation of Turkishness towards him, and the case was decided by Strasbourg 3 years after his assassination. And the European Court of Human Rights in Perinchek doesn't hesitate to mention the case of that journalist. So, but what is very striking is the way the court fails to acknowledge the anti-Armenianism as the ideology beyond Perinchek. Perinchek himself is the active member of the so-called Pasha Committee, basically whitewashing one of the main perpetrators of the atrocities towards Armenians in the Ottoman Turkey. And it's very difficult to imagine a supporter of Himmler in Germany who is not anti-Semite.
In this case, I said that was my last question, but yet, in this case, is the Azerbaijan following in Turkey's step in as far as the obvious anti-Armenian policies, the sentiments, and also the rule of law in Azerbaijan that prevents people from expressing opinions and speaking up?
Well, Azerbaijan is already not most fortunate country in terms of freedom of expression, and we've seen it recently with persecution of the prominent NGO member and with several journalists. So it's still yet to see on how the issue of the Armenian genocide will be interplayed in the legal context beyond the political context. It's still to see whether there would be charges applicable to the, let's say, to people who would justify in Azerbaijan the historical fact of Armenian genocide. So far, we just see a blatant political anti-Armenianism, which is expressed by both the Turkish establishment and also Azeri diasporas in Europe. And that is actually a very important aspect which is also overlooked by the court. One of the arguments of the court is that there is in Switzerland, where Dogo Perinchek was making this statement, and therefore Switzerland applied the criminal charges against him. The suggestion of the court is that there was no social situation which would allude us to suppose that there are possible tensions between, let's say, Armenians and Turks. So there is Switzerland didn't take part to, didn't have any indirect interest for in the matters of the Armenian genocide historically. And yet, let's not forget that Dogo Perinchek was making this statement in front of the Turkish diasporas on a meeting. So they've completely overlooked the presence of the Turkish and smaller, of course, Azeri diasporas in Europe these days.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope our conversation was very interesting and informative for the viewers as well.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and greetings from Amsterdam.
Thank you very much. Good day.